Welcome back to the Loose Framing Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Martin Nolich, and joining me my two compatriots. Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Starting with
Jesse Brock.
And I'm Hillary Weber.
Thank you guys for being here. We're talking about Tampa Theatre today.
Tampa Theatre.
We have some great guests. We have Jill Witecki and John Bell from the theater, the PR manager and CEO, director, respectively. Mm-hmm. And for those listening, if you live in Tampa Bay, I'm sure you know what Tampa Theatre is. And if you don't live in Tampa Bay, you've probably seen the Tampa Theatre if you've ever seen a movie, commercial, or photo shoot that has taken place in Tampa Bay. It usually is one of those iconic places that
It's the vertical
marquee that says Tampa, all lit up in lights, that appears all the time.
Yeah. Which I actually just saw, they posted that someone got a tattoo the size of their forearm, just the Tampa Theatre marquee.
It's got
like a cult following now.
It's an iconic theater. It's on the Hague World Registry site. It's 96 years old. It's one of the last remaining John Eberson movie palaces to be built and maintained in the United States. I think it might be it's certainly not the oldest, but one of the oldest continuously operated movie palaces in the U.S. too. So let's just talk about you guys' experience at Tampa Theatre and sort of what it means to you and the community. So I'll start with you, Jesse.
Well, personally, Tampa Theatre means a lot to me. My first movie I ever saw there, I was 16 years old and I was on a date and I saw Casablanca on the balcony and it was very romantic and I felt like an adult. I was like, okay, this is nice. We dressed up, very fancy, black and white, it was just, the whole thing was just amazing. Since then, I now famously, Jill loves it when I say this, but I'm like, Tampa Theatre is pretty much my second office at this point because we do so much community partnership and events through them. Yeah. And it gives me butterflies every time I walk in there. And that's not a lie. No, I just love it.
It's a super cool space to activate.
Recently, when we did Film Tampa Bay Presents, I was actually able to present on stage for the first time ever, and it was just
I forgot that was your first hosting gig.
Yep. And it was a long time coming, but I was just like, I was behind the scenes and getting ready, and I got to do the little lever picture in the background, and
you got to introduce Magic Mike of all films.
Yes, I did. So yeah, that was the cherry on top.
Hillary, you're a more recent transplant to the Tampa Bay area. Just because I've been there so many times, it sort of gets lost in you, the magic of it, walking in for the first time. But what was like your experience walking in for the first time?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a little bit newer to Tampa. So I had a different exposure to John Eberson, the architect. I worked the film festival circuit for many years before I started working for the Film Commission. And so I was able to see some of Eberson's other theaters, the Olympia in Miami. There's a theater in Silver Spring, Maryland, where AFI has their film festival. There's one in Austin, the Paramount, where South by Southwest has their film festival. So I had already seen some of his other creations. And then when I was able to see the Tampa Theatre first time, oh my God, like it took my breath away. And I know that's what everybody says. Everybody says it's stunning, but it is so incredibly well maintained compared to some of these other spaces. Yeah. And you're going to hear from John and Jill about all of the wonderful history behind it. But there were over 500 of these theaters that were built. And I think less than 16 that are still open.
Yeah.
So
I think they're one of only 3 that have the original Wurlitzer left of those. So it's just an incredible theater. Jesse, we like I said, we activated a lot, but we're not only a huge supporter of Tampa Theatre, but give us some of the things that we do with Tampa Theatre during the year.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, because it's so important to me, is the camp that we sponsor every year. It's a filmmaker camp where kids come in for 1 week long micro camps, but they come out of it with a full movie that they've created. And this is kids that are ages, 5th grade to 9th grade. So their creativity in that space is super awesome to watch.
Yeah. What else do we do?
Film Tampa Bay Presents, which is something that I mentioned earlier. That was when we presented Magic Mike, but we do that 4 times a year. It's a quarterly series. We presented The Conjuring 3, and we had special guests Paul Wilson and Eugenie Bondurant that were doing a Q&A after that. We've presented Iron Man, which was really fun. Bob Layton was there, the co-creator Is that the right title for him? The
Yes.
co-creator of Iron Man.
Co-reinventor, I think is what you want to say.
Yeah. That's a different episode. You guys should tune in to Bob Layton's episode. But anyways, we presented Iron Man there and then had the screenwriter, Hawk Ostby? Ostby. It's Norwegian. Hawk Ostby. Anyways, we had the screenwriter do a Q&A afterward, and we do events throughout the year. We also host opening night for Gasparilla International Film Festival. A lot of the times we host opening night there, and it's just, there's something magical about hosting events there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, we've gone a little long with the intro. We have a great interview. I hope you guys stick around for that. And then join us on the flip side. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the spooky experiences we've had in a 96-year-old theater. But with that, thanks for joining us, and tune in for the interview coming up next. Welcome back to Loose Frame Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Tyler Martin-Olich, and joining me now is Jill Witecki, Marketing Director of
Did you hear how
Tampa
he
Theatre.
just went into like announcer voice there for a second? That was awesome.
Is that noticeable?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, welcome, Jill,
Thank you.
to the podcast. And also with us is CEO and Director of the theater, John Bell.
Good to be here.
How are you guys?
I'm good.
Great.
My voice isn't that different.
It was funny. That was funny.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah, but you have a radio voice
I
too.
do too, but like,
When you get on the phone, you use your radio voice.
Well, you can hear it from the next off, and you
Yeah.
can tell when I'm talking to somebody that I don't want to be talking
Yeah,
to.
I can.
Like he'll send me a little message like, "You don't want to be in that conversation." I'm like, nope.
well, I do want to be talking to you guys, so it's a pleasure for you guys to be here today. Tampa Theatre, for people who have never been here before, is not only iconic to the topography of downtown, but it really is part of the heart and soul of what makes Tampa special. So, Jill, let's tee this up here for our audience. Tell us a little bit about the history of Tampa Theatre and why it's so unique.
Well, first of all, geographically, you're dead on. If you draw a circle around downtown Tampa, Tampa Theatre is literally the center of that circle. We have been at the heart of downtown Tampa since 1926, and opened in a time when Tampa was a really bright, vibrant place. And so over 96 years now, you know, it's seen the ups and downs of Tampa. It has served at the best of times as kind of this amazing community gathering space. At the worst of times in the early 70s when the building was rescued, it was a beacon. It was literally a symbol from the leadership of Tampa that they weren't ready to let downtown die. And now, 96 years later, we are seeing this amazing kind of renaissance in downtown Tampa where people live there now and people are walking their dogs, and there's a vibe in downtown Tampa that we've never seen before. Yeah. And Tampa Theatre is so proud to be a part of that.
John, let's bring you in the conversation. Being the head of a historic building, I'm sure there's funding issues and everything else you deal with daily. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about what the mission of Tampa Theatre is in your mind.
Well, it's to preserve, protect, and program that landmark for generations. And those three key words, preserve and protect and program, are, at our top of our minds every single day. So, our challenge is to not only maintain the building, but more importantly, figure out how to program the building in a way that is relevant to today's audiences. So that's the fun part. It's also the big challenge too, is to try and understand what can work in that building. There's some things we can't handle, but there's a lot that we can. So, yeah, I mean, that's the mission.
And how do you keep the theater running? Obviously, there's ticket sales and things like that, but where does the main source of funding come from?
Well, our annual operating budget on the operating side is about $4 million a year. We earn about 75% of that from the box office and concessions and rental fees and those kinds of things. Which means that we have to raise 25%, which is about $1 million a year that we have to raise, and that comes in a variety of sources, including, obviously grants, some state support, city support, county support, but mostly individuals who give some foundation support. We have a couple of fundraisers every year, so we cobble it together every year, and although I wouldn't describe us as being, flush with cash, we are stable because the community continues to support the building.
Yeah, and they certainly do. Jill, one of the things I think that makes Tampa Theatre unique is a lot of historic theaters of that age were part of like vaudevillian tradition. It was more of a traditional stage theater that then became a movie theater. But Tampa Theater was always a actual movie theater.
We opened as a silent movie palace in 1926, and one of the interesting parts of the biz back then was who was funding these movie palaces. It was actually the studios, the movie studios, that were funding it. So we were built with Paramount money. We were part of the Paramount family. We've always been called the Tampa, but we were part of the Paramount family. And so that money, that talk about being flush with cash, that influx of money was the studio's way of competing. They were all trying to build the biggest, best, most beautiful movie palaces. And so a lot of the buildings, a lot of the movie palaces of that time were these ridiculously ornate, grand buildings. For us, we were doubly fortunate that we were built by an architect named John Eberson, who was kind of the guy building movie palaces back then, and was specifically known for his architectural style that he called the atmospheric. So Tampa Theatre, if you've never seen it, first of all, Google it, and you'll see that kind of night sky dotted with stars, the rooftops, the vines, the birds, making it feel like you're in this Mediterranean courtyard at night. That was his atmospheric style. And now 96 years later, the number of Eberson atmospherics that even exist anymore has dwindled to just a handful. And of those, there's really only one that is still true to its original programming, like you mentioned, of being film, although we were part of the vaudeville circuit, that still has most of its original fixtures and furnishings, can claim to be the most intact Eberson atmospheric left in the world, and according to his writings at the time, was his favorite of his atmospherics that he built. So Tampa Theatre really is unique in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
I'll let both of you guys chime in on this question, but there was other grand movie palaces built in Tampa Bay around the same time. You have almost a sister site at the Rialto Theater, which is no longer a theater anymore. It's just sort of an empty event space. Mm-hmm. How did Tampa Theater survive for that long, continuously showing movies?
That's a good question. I mean, within 2 blocks of where Tampa Theater is, there were 4 other theaters. Now, they weren't as grand as Tampa Theater. I mean, when John Eberson plopped down Tampa Theater in the middle of downtown, it was clearly the best, most beautiful theater in the region. The others, there was one right across the street where the TICO headquarters is now, was the Florida Theater, which was interesting because if you could look at postcards of the day, you could see the Tampa Blade sign, the Florida Blade sign. It said Tampa, Florida. But Tampa Theater survived, I think, because it was always regarded as Tampa Bay's best, most significant, most beautiful theater. Mm-hmm. And when it became endangered in the 70s, and there were plans being developed to possibly demolish it, the community just said, we don't think so. So they stepped in. The other theaters, I think people have, people who attended the Florida or the Palace or the Strand, which were theaters nearby, they certainly had fond memories of going there. But the building itself, Tampa Theater as a building, was so significant and so significantly superior to the other ones that I think that was the one that they said, no, we got to keep this one.
Yeah. Jill, we live in a market right now where, theaters are either closing or going bankrupt. It's very hard to engage with audiences. And I always find it funny looking back at the old photos of Tampa Theater and loud and proud air conditioning. Like that's all they needed to do to get audiences in, which we live in Tampa, Florida here. It is hot during the summer.
All the time.
You offer air conditioning,
just during the summer?
There.
No, it's all the time.
You're right. It's all the time. What is your biggest hurdle in engaging with audiences and marketing the theater? It's a gorgeous theater and you have a lot of programmed comedians and concerts and things like that draw their own crowd. But just for movies, how do you engage with the community?
Well, it's, as you know, in this weird post-COVID time that we're in, there was a pause in the entire industry. And so, we're still kind of playing catch up from that in the product that we're seeing. It doesn't help that during the pandemic, kind of under the radar, a lot of businesses were deregulated, and the movie industry was one of them. So the rules that had governed our industry since the late 40s are gone. They're just gone. And so, a lot of the rules that we lived by up to that point about clearances, what was the nearest theater that could show the same movie? What was the product that was available to us has all changed. And so we are every day learning what those new rules mean. Now, for some of the Cineplexes, obviously, it means that they're struggling and having to make some dire changes. For us, I don't want to brag, but it really hasn't been, it's been mostly good. I mean, the fact that over 4th of July weekend last year, we got to open Top Gun Maverick. That never would have been available to us. Now, it was a couple of weeks after it had been in the market, but yeah, you can go to a Cineplex and see it. You can watch it on streaming, or you can come to a beautiful 1,200-seat building where we could project jets into the night sky flying over your head while you're sitting and watching the movie. So, the answer to your question is experience.
Yeah.
What do we have that other theaters don't have? We have the Tampa Theatre experience. You are never going to get to see a movie in a room that beautiful with that many other people anywhere else in town. And talk to any movie director and they'll tell you that's how movies are meant to be seen. It's supposed to be a communal experience where you're all sharing that scream, that laugh, that sigh at the end of the movie, as they ride off into the sunset. You're never going to get that experience on your couch. So, coming to Tampa Theatre allows you to see that movie how it was meant to be seen. For the new films, and for the older films, we're one of the only theaters left in the country that can still present, for example, a silent movie with a live organist.
Yeah.
So whichever end of the movie spectrum you want to experience, Tampa Theatre can do that.
And that's really important. I mean, when you think of silent films, they're not silent. They were never intended to be silent.
No.
They always came with an accompanying orchestral composition. And one of the great experiences of coming to Tampa Theatre is to see the organ rise up or descend down and to hear the power of that organ. Talk a little bit about the Wurlitzer. Is it a Wurlitzer?
It's a Wurlitzer.
I only know that because I might have damaged it on a shoot not too long ago.
You made good. It's okay.
We figured that one out. But tell us a little about just the history of that, because it is original, right?
Yep. It's a mighty Wurlitzer. Not just a Wurlitzer, but it's referred to as the Mighty Wurlitzer. It is original to the building, and it has its own sort of perilous story behind it. So theater organs were developed in the 1920s when the studios were building all these outrageous movie palaces to be one of the ways that a silent film could be accompanied. In Tampa Theatre's case, the orchestra pit was there, the theater organ was there, but there was also, in the early days, a 17-piece orchestra that played the accompaniment live. But they couldn't do 6 shows a day. So the organ would sometimes play with the orchestra, sometimes it would be just solo. But they were like 3,000 theaters were built, 3,000 theater organs were put in. Of all of those that were built, most of them are just gone. But there are 40 theater organs left in their original homes in the world, and Tampa Theatre has one of them. This theater organ actually left the building and took a field trip for 30 years over to a church on Bayshore. It was sold to them, I think, in the early 50s. And then when the building was rescued, at that time serendipitously, the organ was going to be replaced by that church. So the leadership then had the foresight to acquire the organ back and reinstall it. So it's a magnificent instrument. It's very different from a church organ or what most people would think of as an organ. It's all driven by wind, but the fun part of it is that it has all these special effects on it. So you can call up a ooga horn, you can call up a train whistle, you can call up a doorbell or a bird chirping or a bass drum. It was meant to be a very vibrant instrument, and it is. Now, it's like crazy to maintain. We are fortunate that we've got a group of volunteers, very dedicated, and they come in every weekend on Saturday mornings, and they tweak it and fix it and tune it. And these are like retired rocket scientists from NASA. This is a very complicated instrument, but it's a great great instrument, and sort of is a restoration project inside the giant restoration project that's Tampa Theatre.
Yeah, I never thought about that. You can't just call up the Organs R Us to come in and fix something of that age.
No.
Tuning the organ is kind of like construction on I-4. Like they just start at one end and go
never
all
ends,
the way
and it goes
across,
back.
and then you start it, keep going.
So speaking of maintaining things like the organ, for our viewers who are watching this on YouTube, and if you're listening, you might not know this, but I'm a shorts and t-shirt kind of guy. If you see me in a suit, it's because something catastrophically went wrong. And I just recently bought a home that was built in 1909. And since moving in 5 days ago, I've just had nothing but problems, including a flood that ruined most of my clothes. So I understand the pains now of owning an old building. What are some of the biggest challenges you've had in your career that you've had to overcome as far as maintaining the building? I know the HVAC was a huge one.
Yeah, HVAC was a big one, but we've got that mostly solved. It's still, there are other components of the HVAC that need some tender loving care. You mentioned the air conditioning, and fun fact, Tampa Theatre was the first public building in Tampa to have air conditioning. So they sold quite a few tickets just because of that, to come feel what man-made air felt like. But, I think, the biggest challenge in terms of just fundraising and getting to the projects is that, the fun, sexy stuff is all the decorative restoration, the paint and plaster, and seeing that be lovingly restored to its original look. That's fun, and that's actually kind of easy to raise money for. The hard part is water intrusion, right? How do you deal with that? How do you mitigate that? And how do you got to get geotech engineers, and it's not sexy at all.
Yeah.
The electrical system, which in a building like that is extensive, we finally got the upgrades, the initial upgrades done to the distribution in 2016, 17. But that's not sexy, right? You can't put a plaque on that. So there's all this infrastructure in a very large 38,000 square foot, 1,200 seat building that needs attention and needs to be brought into the 21st century, because it's still way back in the 20th century in some cases. And the other challenge is figuring out how do you integrate all the new technology, the fiber optic cables, all the runs, the connectivity that you need throughout the building. How do you do that in a way that is sensitive to the architecture, so that you're not disrupting anything? How do you hide it, right? And so, those are all problems that will be solved. But the biggest problem is that there's of the money that still needs to be raised for the completion of the restoration, probably 80% of that is going to be spent on stuff people will never see.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the biggest challenge that we've got.
But it's also the most important because it's future-proofing Tampa Theatre, so it'll be around for another 9,600 plus years.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So I have to imagine, Jill, that with a building that old, even if you believe in the paranormal or not, there's probably been some ghost stories that have floated around there.
Well, and you've got the smirk on your face because you and I both know that it's the most haunted building in Tampa. You and I have both had experiences there and have spent a lot of time and a lot of late night lights off scenarios hunting ghosts at Tampa Theatre. Yes, of course it's got ghosts. And, we joke when we go to the big conferences, our friends at the League of Historic American Theaters talk about how you're not a historic theater if you don't have a ghost. Like, everybody's got a ghost. Well, we've got a lot of ghosts, and we have 6 that we talk about on our tours. But the most fun part about kind of welcoming new people to the building, new employees, and kind of talking to all the old employees is that we all have stories. We've all had experiences there. And so there's kind of this level of belief that I think, you've got normal, and then you've got Tampa Theatre normal.
Yeah.
And then anything that happens above and beyond Tampa Theatre normal is when people start paying attention. So hearing things, lights going on and off, like that distinct noise that a theater seat makes when you fold it down. That's all Tampa Theatre normal. That's like everyday type stuff. So it's when, you're getting doors slamming or shadow figures walking by or, crazy readings on your meters. That's when people really start paying attention.
John, have you had a spooky experience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was this is years ago, but I was up in my office finishing up some paperwork after a concert. And it must have been 1:00 in the morning. And I realized, oh, damn, I left a receipt downstairs in another office. I got to grab it because I wanted to tie up all this paperwork. And everyone had gone. The crews had gone, artists had gone, audiences, volunteers, everybody's gone. It's just me in the building. So I walk down the long hallway, and I go halfway down the stairs, and my office door way behind me slams shut. And I thought, you know what? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I should probably just go. So that's what I did. I didn't even turn around. I just went straight to my car and left because I think it was our ghost's way of saying, it's time for you to go home.
Yeah.
And I did.
And what was your experience, Tyler?
I've had a couple in there. And like you said, it's a beautiful theater, but when the lights turn off and there's no one else in there,
it's creepy.
It's very creepy, especially in the bowels of the theater, like behind the stage works and where the orchestra pit used to, where the organ descends to, all that area. It's creepy. And there was one night after a special event, I was in a suit and tie because I was moderating a Q&A, and the minute I finished anything, like, I got to get back in shorts and t-shirt. So I went downstairs to change out of my clothes. And, there's that moment where you can just feel someone enter into a room. I think everyone's experienced that before. I'm not talking about ghosts. I mean, even if you have a back to the door, you can feel the presence of people. And I was 100% the only person downstairs. There was no one else in that area. And you could just hear footsteps coming into the bathroom area. The door didn't open up, but you could hear them. The footsteps continued from outside into the bathroom, and you just felt like something was right behind you. And it freaked me out to the point where I just barely stopped dressing, got my pants on, and ran out. Like, I was done. It didn't feel threatening necessarily, but it was a creepy little moment.
Well, that's the thing about, all of our ghosts, and we talk about this on our tours, is that we don't really have anything evil there. There's nothing bad. People aren't getting like hurt or accosted. There's just people there. There's 96 years of history, and there are still people there that just because you can't see them doesn't mean that they're not there for the show. They're not there entering the offices or using the bathroom. For me, my fun ghost story that I tell is you actually had a tour of new board members coming through. And so it was October, November. That's when our new board members start. And so my job on this tour was to kind of run ahead and make sure that doors were open, lights were on, everything was cleaned up and as it should be. And we came through the basement, got to dressing room number 2. And now, as I said, we were part of the vaudeville circuit. So we have these 2 dressing rooms in the basement that were for the vaudevillians. And dressing room number 1, open, lights on, no problem. Dressing room number 2, the door was closed. So I went to open the door. And as I pushed the door open, there's a chair and like a box fan that sit in there for ventilation. And the chair and the box fan were behind the door. So as I pushed open the door, I had to push the chair and the fan out of the way, which is not scary. I mean, nobody would ever make a TV show about that.
But it couldn't have possibly been done if you know how the layout is. Like,
there's only one door in, and it opens inward.
That's creepy too.
It's just stuff like that.
I think we've just got some souls who are hanging out, right? And I fully intend on haunting that place when I'm done.
Absolutely.
If you got to hang out somewhere in the afterlife, that's a pretty good spot.
That's a pretty cool one. And regardless whether you believe in ghost ride, a building at that age has a memory, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that you feel that from the time you walk in to the time you leave. It feels like you're part of history. You're part of Tampa, which I think makes that building one of the most unique places I've ever been in. So we're always appreciative to be able to show it off and take people there. And it's great for filming locations, so you can work around the schedule. Let's talk a little bit about the future of Tampa Theater, but we'll start with just the future of theaters in general. Where do you think theaters are going to be in 5-10 years?
Gosh, it is so up in the air right now. There is no crystal ball. But I do think obviously it's a time of profound transition for the film industry, particularly on the exhibition side. And that's, it's something that's been brewing for a while, for a decade or more, with the sort of rise of the proliferation of distribution mechanisms for content, and now you've got the pandemic sort of accelerated people's comfort level with streaming. But I've always said that if I were the CEO of a Regal or an AMC, I would be really worried about the long-term trends, regardless of the most recent disruptions. Because let's face it, going to and I'm not a film snob. I go out to the Cineplex and I sit and watch movies, but it's a rather mundane experience, right? And so I think that the future of Tampa Theatre is actually bright because there's going to be contraction on the exhibition side. I don't know how much. I think the industry's changing. And I also think from a consumer standpoint, people are going to want something special. It's going to take something special to pull them off of their couch to go out and have that sort of experience. And that's what we do. Tampa Theatre is special. And so if we do our jobs correctly, it's just a matter of figuring out, what content is right and what can we get from the distributors, and their phone numbers are changing with alarming frequency these days. So, we don't really know, but one thing that Tampa Theatre has always done down through its 96-year history is it has adapted, right? And we don't have a choice. We're not declaring bankruptcy. We're already nonprofit, right? So we're gonna figure it out because we have to, right? But I think ultimately the future's bright.
Well, and I know this is a movie podcast. We're talking about film, but one of Tampa Theatre's superpowers is that magic mix that we have. Yeah. Film being a huge part of that, but in more recent years, some live performances and concerts being part of that, our rental events, our education events, our special events, all of those play together. And so we are small enough and nimble enough that, when one of those bars starts to lower, the other ones can rise. And we can always, just like a good sound mix, we can constantly adjust those sliders and make sure that we are opening those doors 700 times a year like we like to do, and making sure that the mix is always optimizing what's available to us.
Do you think we're going to see a paradigm shift back to how theater distribution originally was, with more of a vertical integration, where you're going to have a streaming service that has its own 2-screen theater? Because
we're already seeing
you have to own that opening weekend to recoup a $200 million movie. You're not going to do it through subscriptions.
Well, we mentioned the deregulation. That Supreme Court case in 1948 is exactly what crushed the system you're talking about. And now that that's gone, yes, the door is open to
and I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I do think that there's going to be that kind of vertical integration happening. I think there's going to be mergers and acquisitions, but the people with money these days, it's not Warner Brothers and it's not Paramount or Universal. It's Amazon Prime. It's Disney. It's Netflix. So it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. But I do think that you're going to see some of that beginning to roll out. I just think, and if I don't know. I mean, I don't want to send a signal out to the CEOs at Disney and Amazon Prime, but right now you can pick up a movie chain for about $7. It's a buyer's market right now if you're looking to pick up a bunch of multiplexes.
So I think one of the things I enjoy most about Tampa Theatre is that you're not like a multiplex, right? You're not a 20-screen theater that needs to block book 5 screens for a single movie. You can be a little more nimble in your programming, and you play things that might not come to an AMC or a Regal. But I have to imagine that's hard to get a small art house film and justify screening it in a theater that's 1,200 seats. But you guys are actually expanding next door to try to solve that issue. So talk a little bit about the T2 or the micro cinema.
Yeah, T2 has been our secret code name for this project that has been on the drawing boards for probably a decade now, and but it's to take what was a former storefront. We own it and control it, and it had been a flower shop for a long time, and we're converting it into a 40-seat cinema, and that's a game changer for us because now it can make sense for us to do some things that absolutely don't make sense in a 1,200-seat house, and it'll give us the ability to have a little bit more buying power with distributors because we can guarantee them a play longer than we have been and without interruption. It doesn't solve all of the programmatic problems that we have, but it is a huge game changer for us, and I'm very excited about it. And we started the design, and actually the finishes are just now coming into focus because we started with the tech, and we brought in Boston Light and Sound, which is they're just the best. And had them design the tech, the sight lines, the acoustics, the projection, because we said if this thing doesn't work well as a cinema, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what it looks like if it doesn't work. So we want it to be a great cinema, which we're confident it will be. and we should be getting we should be finishing this thing up in 2023. So, I'm very excited about that. I think the entire staff, I know Jill's excited about it because of the different programmatic possibilities it gives us. It just gives us a different way to serve the audience.
So I've been lucky enough to see some of the design looks through its many iterations. And I think one of the first earlier ones was more like an Apple store. Like it looked way too modern. It didn't fit what you guys were. How hard was it adjusting that and finding an architect that could understand the bones of Tampa Theater and then bring that over into what's going to be a new space, but it needs to match the old space?
Well, we're very lucky with T1, with Tampa Theater, that our architect wrote a lot about his design choices. We kind of know what was in his head. And he talks a lot with his atmospheric theaters that a lot of the movies at the time were kind of adventure stories. They were taking you to different exotic parts of the world. And he wanted his theater to be an extension of that. So it was almost like set design. He wanted to create that mood as soon as you walked in. Well, with T2, we knew that, this is a tiny space. This is a little tiny space. And we knew that trying to duplicate the big room wasn't going to work. It was just going to look silly. We wanted it to have its own personality. So the directive we gave to our architects was there needs to be a familial resemblance. This might be the granddaughter, but we need to see that same DNA. And furthermore, it needs to tell a story. John Eberson talked about when you walked in on day one, he didn't want it to look brand new. He wanted it to look like something that had always been there that maybe you just discovered for the first time. And so we kind of gave them that directive with T2 as well, that it doesn't need to look new. It doesn't need to look modern. It doesn't need to look like a mini Tampa Theater, but it needs to tell a story. And that can be a fantastical story. You can create a place that doesn't actually exist in real life. And it did take a little bit of, back and forth and trying to, sometimes I don't think people get to be that creative sometimes. Yeah. So we had to kind of encourage them of like, no, it's okay to be a little bit crazy on this one. And where we finally landed, should I say? Yeah. Oh, this isn't airing until 2023. I can say it. We encouraged them to build John Eberson's study. What would John Eberson's private screening room that he and his family enjoyed together, what would that look like? And once that idea was settled on, the ideas that started coming out of the architects and the designers were just magic.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited for this. We're coming to the end of the podcast here. It's been a joy to talk to both of you guys. But as we're wrapping up, I'd like some final thoughts from both of you. If you could reach back in your memory and pick a favorite moment that you've experienced, whatever that might be at Tampa Theater, what would it be, Jill?
I very clearly remember my very first trip to Tampa Theater. My family had just moved to Tampa in 1990, so this was probably maybe 1992. I came there on a school field trip, and it was French Culture Day. So we got to see a little ballet, and then we got to see a French film. And I'm sure that somebody at Hillsborough County Schools approved this film. You guys didn't just go rogue and pick this movie. But it was the most scandalous thing most of these young eyeballs had ever seen. It was a French farce, and it was raunchy. And my mom was one of the chaperones on this trip. And so this poor woman is like trying to cover the eyes of every kid sitting next to her. And she needn't worry because I wasn't paying attention to the screen. I was falling in love with this building. After that went on to be a volunteer there and went to my second date with my husband was there 12 years ago. I joined the Wine Fest committee and then finally getting the opportunity to actually work there and be part of the Tampa Theater story. But that moment, and we were talking about it here in the studio before we started taping, that moment when you walk in and see that building for the first time is breathtaking, and it's something you never forget, and that's what I get to do for a living, is give people that experience.
That's awesome. And I'm just picturing now a bunch of kids like watching Last Tango in Paris or just absolute scandal. Great story. John, how about you?
If you ask me this question any day, I'll probably give a different answer because there have been so many memories that I've had in that building. I've met my fair share of celebrities, from Annie Lennox to Gina Davis and Dana Carvey, Seinfeld, Grumpy Cat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. probably the biggest of all.
Line around the block.
But that's not really I cherish more what I see in the way of audiences' reactions as they're coming into the building. And I remember one time years ago, we were slammed with this very successful run of the very first time that a sing-along came out. It was Sing-Along Sound of Music, and we had our first run of that. And so the shows were packed and we were short-staffed. And so I put on the ticket taker costume, right? Very regal outfit with white gloves and everything. And I'm standing there, and this mother is bringing in some girls, obviously with some friends, and they're all excited and jumping up and down. And I'm at the top of the ramp to take the tickets. And the mother sees me, and she calms the children down. She says, "Now, children, settle down, be quiet, get your tickets out. Hand the man your ticket. This is a real theater." And that made my heart sink or soar. And I just people's reactions to the building, particularly those first timers when they're coming in, is what it's all about, right? I mean, it's that experience, that wow factor that people get. And that's what's rewarding.
Yeah. I'll share mine too. It's such a beautiful theater. You walk into the lobby and it's magical. You see the birds and the plaster, and it's just beautiful. But you don't realize how big the theater is until you walk into the actual theater space. And then even then, it's a 2-story theater, so there's a balcony, orchestra seating, and then mezzanine, like a proper like movie house, right?
It's a real theater.
But you can only see so much as you're walking in because the balcony sort of blocks your view. And walking past where the balcony overhang is, and finally walking in that full space and looking up and seeing the night sky for the first time with twinkling stars, it was just mind-blowing. It's like, I've never been to a theater space like this before. So I will always remember seeing that sky for the first time. So it has been a pleasure talking with you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love Tampa Theater. You guys know I try to support you guys as best I can.
And we appreciate it.
You are an amazing community partner, and everyone in the Tampa Bay community should. If you haven't been, you should go. And if you have the means, you should support. Where can they learn more about Tampa Theater, Jill?
TampaTheatre.org. And we are fancy. We're theater with an R-E, and we're a .org because we're a nonprofit. So TampaTheatre.org, it's got everything coming up, all of our tours, all of our movies, all of our shows, and certainly ways to donate and volunteer, however you can support us.
Well, I thank you both. Jill Batecki, John Bell, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our guests listening, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Loose Frame Podcast. Joining me again is Hillary Weber and Jesse Brock. That was a pretty fun little interview there.
Oh my gosh, it was so good.
I learned
They're great interviews.
They're fantastic, and I learned
the
some
stories.
things that I had never heard of, like the organ being removed and then reinserted back into the theater. So Hillary, let me start with you. What was some things? I mean, you've been to the Tampa Theater a couple times now. What was something you learned that you just didn't know before that interview?
Well, like you said, the organ thing was incredible that they were able to recover that after so long. But I really loved hearing them talk about John Eberson and the work that they did to put into the original design, and then how they were taking some of that and reincorporating it in a new way for the new space.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be really exciting. I was reading a 1926 edition of Motion Picture News, and it had an interview with the architect, and he said in it, the masses might not know art, but they feel it. And I think that that's definitely something that you feel that when you step into that space. And then another kind of fun thing from that article was a 9P creed from Eberson. So he had a little motto: prepare practical plans for pretty playhouses, please patrons, pay profits. And I think that we are definitely pleased patrons.
I
Alliteration
love all those.
aside.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I mentioned, it's sort of like discovering the fountain of youth, right? And it feels like that as you're walking through the space. I mean, just imagine a conquistador like slowly pulling back vines and seeing more of something in the distance until all of a sudden, like, oh, here's the fountain of youth. I found it. And I always get that impression as you're walking through the space, through the many rooms and the way it's laid out, that it's just more and more to discover. It's very, very interesting. How about you, Jesse? Did you learn anything from the interview?
First of all, the story that Jill told about the French movie
Oh, I love that.
I was belly laughing, but trying to be quiet in the background. It was so funny. But something that John had actually mentioned was the different theaters that were all within a 1 mile radius back in the day that are no longer there, and that the Tampa marquee stood the test of time. And there used to be a Tampa and a Florida marquee, both on Franklin Street, I believe, so that when you took a photo of it,
literally right across the street from it,
it said Tampa, Florida. And I think I've seen that, like in some old historic book. But that's just, I don't know. I just didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah,
some Tampa history.
There's some great old photos floating around of the Tampa Theater and the marquee and the Model Ts out front, and you see people lining up, and they're dressed to the nines, right? Because it's an experience. This was an event that they would go out on a Friday night and experience that with their community, right? And I think Jill said it. Film was always meant to be consumed communally, right? I think that's the magic of a cinema, which you don't really get at an AMC necessarily, but you go to a movie palace like Tampa Theater. Joyce would have said it was aesthetic arrest, right? It's the idea that you are arrested by the beauty of what you see around you, and then you feel compelled to engage with it in a way that you talk to your neighbors, you talk to the people that saw the movie and experienced in that atmosphere with you, and you walk out of the theater and there's people are having conversation about what you've seen. You don't see that anymore in normal movie houses at all.
I remember when we went to, this doesn't have anything to do with Tampa Theater specifically, but it was another historic movie palace called the Elgin Theater in Toronto when we went to Toronto Film Festival. And I saw the film Life Itself, which was an Amazon production, but they were showing it as part of the festival. And that is a tearjerker. But it was such a communal experience because I was in a row of women. Not saying this was strictly the female experience, but someone literally had a box of Kleenex and they were passing it to their neighbor because everyone was in tears. And it was just like the craziest experience with strangers ever.
Speaking of experiences with strangers, there's some strange ghosts who might be inhabiting that space.
That segue.
Right off the top of my head, I'm getting better at this. I shared my ghost tour experience. I have others, a lot of others. Yeah. Jill and John certainly have had some. You've done some research into some spooky things that have happened.
I did some research, and I'm going to share the most famous ghost story that came out of Tampa Theater. So I'm going to read it. The theater is supposedly haunted by a man who worked the projector during the golden age of film. Rumor has it he died of a heart attack in the booth while screening a movie, and he still shows up every now and then to cause a little trouble for theater goers.
Do you believe in the paranormal, Jesse?
I do. I believe in ghosts. Do you guys believe in ghosts?
I mean, I'm not going to say no, and then they'll get all pissed off at me.
Especially if someone's listening right now, you never know.
Yeah.
I certainly
like your
do.
story you shared with honestly, I got goosebumps when you were like, there was footsteps following me. I'm like, oh, that's creepy.
And look, a lot of things, your mind plays tricks on you. It's an old building. It makes sounds at night. But there's been weird things in there. There was one night where literally I was trapped in that same dressing room that Jill referenced for her story, which is dressing room number 2 downstairs. And when I say downstairs, it's like a boiler room area, right? This is behind the theater stages where all the guts of the building is. And it's real creepy. And even with the lights on, it's real dark and strange down there. But I was...
with all the water pipes.
Everywhere. It looks like a boiler room, right? And I went back into one of these dressing rooms, and I was packing my stuff up after a Gasparilla Film Festival event. And that door closed, and then it would not open. Which, if you're alone and there's no cell service downstairs.
No, there's not.
I was one of the last people to leave the building, and I don't know if anyone knew I was down there. So immediately it's like, holy crap, someone's going to walk out of here, lock the door behind them, and not know that I am trapped in this basement. Then I've been in real trouble. And it lasted probably 30 seconds, who knows? But the door just...
enough to panic.
The door just opened again. I was like, all right, that's enough. Like John said, that was a signal. Time to go.
Yeah.
But Hillary, we've both lived in Savannah, and there's certainly some creepy things in Savannah. And you've worked in some historic theaters and been in some. Is there any ghost experience, or someone that you knew had a ghost experience in
a theater or just anywhere?
Theater.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I used to work at the Trustees Theater in downtown Savannah, which is another historic theater. And there would be times when I would be in the auditorium and I'd be the only person there, and I would start getting phone calls from my own number, like my own phone was calling me, and I would try to pick up and nothing would happen, but like it was really weird. And that's the only time that's ever happened. That was the only space that ever happened in. I've never like gotten a call from my own number like when I've just been walking somewhere on the street.
That sounds like a Stephen King novel.
Yeah, I feel like maybe if I had stuck around, there might have been more the lead up to something like darker and more desperate.
That's creepy. There's a bad horror movie called Making Contact, where this little kid's parents died, but he has a little bitty phone with a face on it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
a little kitty phone.
Yeah.
And it would just ring, and he'd pick it up.
Talk to his dead parents.
And his dead parents would be talking to them, or he thinks it's dead parents, and it's not dead parents.
Oh my God!
It's something less. Anyway, that reminded me of that. That's apropos of nothing. Let's finish this off though. What is your favorite Film Tampa Bay event that's taken place at Tampa Theatre?
Oh man, let me think about that, because obviously I presented Magic Mike, but that has not been my favorite, surprisingly enough. Let me think. I'll start
literally had shirtless male dancers at that particular event. That wasn't your favorite one?
I don't know. I think my favorite event probably hasn't taken place yet, because I feel like we keep doing bigger and better things, more exciting things. We bring out, bigger guests. And so I think the best is yet to come, honestly.
I think
That's an awesome answer.
Yes, that was an awesome answer. But it gave me time to think. And I think the screening of The Conjuring has been my favorite so far. It was our very first Film Tampa Bay Presents. It had a local tie to it, but it also had names that a lot of people know, like Patrick Wilson and Eugenie Bondurant, who's a local here, but she's done stuff everywhere. She's actually in a new Marvel show, Werewolf by Night. Is that what it's called?
Yep.
Yeah, she's crazy. She's so talented. But we had a special shout out from Patrick Wilson to kick it off, and everyone kind of Halloween bound. I don't know. There was just like an energy to the event, and I was just really excited because it was our first one and it was a success.
Even though I told our celebrity guests it was casual, they still came dressed to the nines. I didn't get the memo, so there's that great moment at the end where I introduced them. They come out for the Q&A, and they're gorgeously dressed, and I am literally in flip-flops, shorts, and a ratty t-shirt.
Birkenstocks.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
That's your signature look.
Clearly missed the memo on this
That's
one.
what the talking head said. If you want people to remember you, always wear the same outfit.
Yeah. The only thing was a bathrobe. I could have been the dude up there. It was a very fun experience.
I think another great thing about that event was the really wide mix of people that showed up, and John and Jill said, they really are trying to reach everybody. So it's kind of a good example of an event that did that and was appealing to 100%. Not just kids, but adults, teenagers, college students, anybody. Yeah.
And that's why I love horror.
And it was free to the
community. It brings out everybody. It was free to the community. And I think that's something very important in all of our events. We try to make as free as we can.
So that people can experience. I mean, a lot of the times, Film Tampa Bay Presents, people will be like, oh, I've always driven by Tampa Theater, but I've never been inside. And it's like that event makes it possible for people to experience.
That's one of the coolest things I like is we usually ask either me or Jill, is this your first time? Please raise your hand. And we draw big crowds. We've had over 1,000 people in that room for some of our events, and the number of hands come up. And it's cool to know that something you're doing is exposing people to Tampa Theater, something historic, a moment in time that they probably wouldn't have existed otherwise had we not created it for them and invited them into that space. So. Yeah. Always a cool thing. And again, I'll say it, and if you heard the interview, I saw you in the interview as well, but if you live in Tampa Bay and you've not experienced Tampa Theater, you absolutely should find a reason to do it. Yeah. And if it's not a movie, then come to one of our Film Tampa Bay Presents. They're always free. And if you are able to support them financially or through volunteer efforts, I think it's well worth your time, because that is a magical space that we're very lucky to have as a town. And
their presence on Instagram is really fun. They've kicked up their video content, and they have some spooky stories and stuff like that on there. So follow them, Tampa Theater. That's theater with an R-E, because they're fancy, like Jill said. Do you know the difference between R-E and E-R?
E-R is a traditional movie theater, whereas R-E is more of a
It's like the art
space.
of theater
The art
versus
of theater, yeah.
actual building.
Now you know.
There you go.
In case you didn't.
There you go. Well, with that, we're going a little long here, so let's wrap this up. Hillary, thanks for joining us today. Jesse, same to you. Where can they find us if they want to know more about the Loose Framing Podcast?
We are Loose Framing Podcast. Stream us anywhere you listen to podcasts or watch us on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us at Film Tampa Bay.
And again, we have a ton of cool content coming up at Tampa Theatre, so follow us on social media for all those dates and times. Thanks, guys. See you next time.